Good morning, and welcome everyone to the very first episode of BlockTune Music series. In the lead up to the release that we're having called When Walls Break, it's an album that we're releasing on Stax on the 19th of November. I'm Good Kitty, and I'm the founder of BlockTune Music, and today we are going to dive into the evolution of music from vinyl to virtual. And we have a very special guest with us, Paul Thackwray, who is a leading figure in the global music and entertainment space. He's had 20 years of experience. He's worked with some of the biggest brands in the industry, like Apple, Sony Music, Epic, and currently with a very innovative new platform called ONErpm. Today, we're going to explore the history of music. We're going to look at its current state and just touch on what the future holds for artists in the digital age. And we're also going to talk about what ONErpm is. So I'd also like to thank, before we start, Bitcoin Live DB, Nick and Steve for producing the show. All right, so let's kick it off. Paul, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Good Kitty. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so let's start off with your journey in the music industry. You started at a record store. You've been in the industry from then up until now. You've worked with Sony. You've worked with Apple Music, and now you work with ONErpm, as I mentioned. Why don't you share a little bit about your path and what inspired you to get into the business side of music?
Sure. So I'll try to sort of go over some of the music industry so that it's relevant to our conversation. But I was a child growing up during a time when music was one of the most prominent content types out there. I think we lived in a far less distracting world, and music was one of the most powerful sort of entertainment formats, obviously, which it is over the modern era, but we find ourselves now in an era where people can be easily distracted. There's a lot of images flying around, and I was in a place where I decided it was my thing growing up. Obsessed with artists and records. I would listen to the same album as I know many people age would understand. The truth is, there was just a lot less music, and it was a lot harder to create and make music, which meant that an industry was built around the development of music to feed consumer demand. And that industry was the kind of major label system. Anyway, what led me to where I am right now is, as with any big musician, I wanted to be an artist. And as I finished school and went into university, I did things like DJ, I played in a band, and started to make music my profession. I was interested in throwing parties, DJing. I got to know the managers of nightclubs and venues, and I just got interested in the whole thing. And that's where I started working in a record store in my very early 20s, and moved on to a specialist DJ store called Africa in Johannesburg, South Africa. This was back during a time when we would import vinyl albums as specialists to radios, club DJs, when DJing was vinyl and Technics SL 1200 decks. And literally, if you owned a track on vinyl, a particular remix or version, and if it was a rarity, you may be the only DJ in town that actually had that track. So vinyl at that stage actually had incredible value. And that's when I started traveling overseas. One of the things I did at House Africa was Europe, UK, to source vinyl, to go to suppliers, Wall of Sound, things like that, Warp Records, things like that, and actually purchase vinyl, ship that back to South Africa, and then go and work in the store to supply it to radio DJs and club bass at a decent wage. It was quite a business, actually. That's where I built a network and started to become known as someone in the industry, but I've, of course, still had ambition to be an artist and continue to DJ and play in a band. Job at Sony in the marketing team, where I started to work record marketing. And that's where I came across a certain band that was very popular in South Africa at the time. We were similar ages, and Sony asked me to work on that band. And that's when I realized, because this band was absolutely outstanding, brilliantly talented, that my own musical gifts were not anything above good or mildly average to good. And I realized that I could have more value in the music industry, or to music as a whole, by working in the industry rather than chasing the dream of being an artist. So it was at that stage that I made it my complete focus, and I've never looked back.
It's incredible, Paul. It's amazing how it's just been in your blood right from the beginning, you know, from being a musician yourself. And I've actually heard you sing. You've got a pretty good voice.
Thanks. Appreciate it. There's a record on Spotify. Yeah.
Really? Have you got a record out?
The band 5 years ago recorded an EP that has found its way onto the internet. I'm not going to say who it is or what it is. I don't want to embarrass myself. It's there for posterity and for my children to listen to one day.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What a journey you've had. It's quite remarkable. And yeah, over the years, I have learned so much from you. So once again, grateful to have you on the show. So let's talk about the evolution of music. Okay, so we've seen these major shifts in how music is produced, distributed, and consumed over the years, right? And I think one of the reasons I'm so interested in music on blockchain is because music seems to have led or been very involved in the technological change as things happen. And so let's talk about it. How you would say the music industry has evolved from when you first started to where it is now in the digital age.
Yeah, it's actually so ironic that music as a content type has kind of led the action of content distribution, and yet the music industry is comprised of creatives and marketing people who are not necessarily technologically minded. I guess if we roll all the way back to where it all started, when the technology and ability to record sound kicked in, so an industry kicked off around the recording of artists. I mean, imagine prior to that, the only way that a musician could be heard was live, and they would go around and people would pay to see them. When record kicked off, the ability to distribute music was complementary to that, and so an industry started and companies started pressing up records and selling them. Where it went from there was obviously into a huge boom era. New technology had come about, artists could spread and distribute their music, their careers bloomed, they could tour globally, all of that happened. And, you know, this is over the span of decades, of course. During that vinyl era, though, there was something unique to it that we lost after technology continued to evolve. You couldn't pirate vinyl. The only way that it could be distributed was legitimately through a music store. And if you wanted a song or an album, then you had to buy it. It's interesting that we sort of pause on this point, because there were markets in the world that were much more prominent from a revenue kind of generation point of view. Nigeria in West Africa, interestingly, was one of the biggest, highest grossing musics in the world until we moved to the next stage, which was cassette tape and an ability to copy and share music. I think I'm of an age where I remember sitting in front of my stereo, waiting for songs to play on the radio and sort of timing the record button sort of onto a tape. And I was a kid. I didn't have any money. I loved music, so I certainly didn't pay for it. I remember there were record stores around where you could rent albums. So you could rent it like you would a VHS to watch a movie, take it home for a night, and of course tape it. The cassette tape led to further proliferation of music, particularly to the youth, because we had a way that we could build music collections but not have too much money. We could do it out of our own pocket money. And so that the ability to record music on one stereo was built in. Again, we moved into another era. From there, things got really interesting. Music became interpretable into ones and zeros and became digital. And so the compact disc was born, and yet another boom. There was an upgrade in audio quality, new technology, compact disc players, hi-fi systems, and I think everyone will remember that period as the sort of heyday for the audiophile. High-end stereos, things like that. So anyway, over that period, the major labels really came into play, and they were in play during the vinyl era and then moving through. But the CD era was the peak of the physical business. I think just keeping in mind during this time, the production of music was still expensive. Good studios were a rarity, and if you wanted a high-end music production, it would cost a lot of money. Oftentimes, even though I'm a lover of new music and I follow new things coming out, sometimes I'll sit with music lovers of my age and listen to music from the 70s, which is really interesting because it's punctuated by high budget, literally dozens of session musicians in very costly, kind of expensive studios. Think of Abbey Road and that sort of thing. And the into an album was a highly specialized production, if you will, which is harder to come across these days. And there are a lot of techniques during that time that were developed that may be lost in the kind of modern era. How to mic drum kits correctly, resonance in rooms, all of these analog technologies, sort of higher end music accommodated, the same way you see cutting edge motion pictures and special effects today, where there was money to spend on production, so the quality of the productions was really good. But this led to a big delta between signed artists sent by the major labels and a talented young artist trying to find their way. So when music, from a distribution point of view, became digital, it opened Pandora's box. And I think we all know this. The MP3 came about, and so did the internet. And so the beginning of the digital era rolled in, and the re-establishment of the music industry from both a production and distribution point of view. This started roughly in the mid 90s, kind of mid to late 90s, rolling into thousands, and led us to where we are today and to the industry that we have at the moment. From a sort of gross revenue point of view, the CD was the zenith in that you had a whole lot of industries that were needed to support the physical music industry. There was delivery, distribution, physical retail. And all of those businesses existed between an art and their fan base. And it was like a lot of heavy machinery and funding. So the cost of an album, you know, from a UK point of view, at 13 to 15 pounds retail, involved the production music from an artist, handing it over to a record label, who would then run through this distribution chain of physical manufacture, distribution of physical stock into physical music, and everyone needed to take their margin. It meant that not too much of that retail price was actually available for the artist because of this heavy machinery needed to distribute music. And, you know, this is where some of the disgruntlement and some of the issues that have led to the birth of newer music distribution companies, such as the one that I work for, came about. Artists, as time rolled on and as technology grew and as the digital era developed, you know, started less and less of a reason for why there should be such a gap, particularly a revenue gap, between their music and the audiences that were listening to it. And this obviously then led to MP3 distribution, iTunes, and then ultimately the music subscription model that we are in today. And yeah, that's a sort of summary, if you will. The one thing I would just cap it with is that whilst music industry gross revenue is less than it was during the CD era, profitability in music is much higher. So distribution now does not involve too much more than the connections and licenses that need to be built into the internet to be able to distribute music. So distribution companies are not dealing with vast overheads the same way that record labels and major labels did previously. And therefore, it's enabled far more revenue to be on the table for artists to be able to collect if they are able to do so. So, you know, ultimately, we're in a better era for artists, but I guess there's a lot of there that we should cover.
Yeah, exactly. Because just as you say that the distribution has, the distribution costs have sort of minimized, marketing costs essentially have as well, because a lot of the responsibility with social media lies with the artists to actually create the content. You know, so the job has become bigger for the artist, and yet the income keeps going down. You know, and I think that's where this disgruntlement has come in, whether it's a lack of understanding on what happens on the back end, or whether it's an understanding that they're just being ripped off. And I think, look, we'll cover it, but well, let's talk about it. I mean, you know, it started off with, you know, in the early 2000s with Napster, right? They kind of changed the game in terms of how people could access music, and that set the stage for platforms like Spotify, where I think there's a lot of confusion as to how this revenue isn't received by the artists, you know, and where it's going. And I think that's what's turning artists against Spotify, you know. But the irony is that the consumer is getting music practically for free, and has learned almost not to pay for music. So you know, it's a big task for this to be kind of revolutionized and to find ways to ensure that they are or they do receive a better compensation. And I think, like you were talking about, ONErpm, which is a Web 2 model that is looking to do that. And obviously, we've got blockchain on the other hand, which is also looking to do that. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is the contentious issue with subscription streaming and ad-funded streaming. I think just to give out the various DSPs we call Apple, Spotify, Deezer, etc. DSPs have their models. They are running a business model, so they need customer acquisition modeling. And I mean, I guess because Napster introduced on-demand acts where there was another boom in terms of the music industry. So starting there, people could only buy CD albums previously or maxi singles. We're in many instances overpaying for music. If you wanted one song, you had to buy the whole record, basically. And that included a retail price for it and so on. And I think the reason for the Napster explosion was not so much that the music was free, but more that you could access the music that you wanted. And it was Steve Jobs' Apple that rationalized, well, this is clearly the answer to music distribution. Let's legitimize this business. And they launched iTunes. I have to tell you, just again, a cut of that time is that there was a lot of confusion around Napster about how record labels should proceed. So, for example, D2C, direct to consumer, was something that was investigated and invested in at the time. A lot of the major labels actually developed MP3 download platforms, or developed an MP3 download retail platform so that artists could retail music themselves from their websites. But what transpired from that exercise was, people want one destination for music. Implementation is something that we should probably do, but I'll just say that the majority of people just want easy access to the music that they like. When we get into more specialized segments and super fans, and whether or not super fans and niche genre segments are being fairly dealt with in the modern era, and those artists, that's an interesting topic. But let's just keep it on the mainstream for now. Most people, for one platform, they could go to get the music that they did, and going to their favorite artist's website to just download their music. So I guess a young Daniel Ek in Sweden will have been looking at this, thinking MP3s, piracy. Actually, one of the big motivations Ek had for launching Spotify at the time was that it resolved piracy. So I think just to sort of work through this, all of the DSPs, as we stand right now, have customer models. Apple's is a paid only model, right? So you get 3 months free or 1 month free, you get a trial period, and then after that you pay. Apple Music as a platform makes artists more because all of its subscribers are paid subscribers. Spotify it involves a free ad-funded model, so anyone can sign up to Spotify and access the platform. Limited access. Premium, meaning paying for the subscription, gives you premium access on demand, and that is their model. Spotify, as a result, is a much bigger platform, and continues to hold its growth lead because it's been around longer than Apple. So it is the #1 most used music service in the world, and it's maintaining that lead because of its acquisition model. You can sign up for free, and then they will market to you an email offering you 3 months for 99 cents or like that sort of thing. And you can opt in and pay for a month, and then you can opt. Apple is pay or go, right? So these businesses need to grow. They have to pay their staff, they have to run their infrastructures and so on. And in order to be funded, need to demonstrate these margins of growth. So, I think getting back to how artists get paid relative to this, there's no doubt that if artists were exclusive to Apple, they would make more money. But there's no doubt equally that far fewer people would have access to their music. So therein lies the conundrum. And we kind of sit in a world where anyone is actually able to access music, albeit YouTube to Spotify to premium services, and at various tiers of comfort, right? So you get full on-demand access functionality if you pay, and you have a more clunky experience that you need to piece together if you don't. So riding back to your earlier point, who is being treated most fairly at the moment? Is it the consumer or is it the artist? Well, I think we're in an age where music consumers are enjoying probably the best deal that they've ever had. And I think this is where the potential is, getting back to an artist called fans, specific genres of music, etc., to be able to raise revenue for artists. Like here in the you still see a fair amount of physical music distribution on vinyl. It's for a particular type genre that appeal to audiences that enjoy vinyl. Rock, for example, is still rock bands ship online and vinyl and D2C merchandising, whereas hip hops do not. They're completely digital, and that has to do with how their audiences consume. But it does lead to, I guess, where we are from an innovation point of view of how can we this model where people are engaging with music, the masses are able to engage with music with a low barrier to entry, and then optimally monetize for the artist. And I think, ultimately, good key, this is where Web3 has its opportunity.
Yeah, it is so complex, Paul. It's such a complex subject to speak on, because, like I said earlier, we're reducing the costs. I mean, Daniel Ek, I think, was quoted saying something along the lines of, it's so cheap, or it's almost free to make music because you can make it on your phone. And there's been what I find almost a disrespect for like you were speaking earlier about these incredible productions, which in a way, I wish that there was more budget for artists to start creating that really, if you go to festivals, for example, you're only going to see, or the majority of the bands are older bands that have been around, that can put on a show. Because, I mean, let's face it, live music is where artists really make their money, and merchandising. But, what is your take on this? The streaming services, where do you see artist compensation going? How do we, I mean, you've been around, you've worked at all the major, Sony, from record label to Apple. So you've worked in all the genres, you've seen all the genres go. You've seen the decline in what they're earning. where do you see the future of this going if we don't use Web3? And I think that comes to maybe moving into the conversation of what you guys are doing at ONErpm.
Yeah. So,
because I mean, we can see on the slide right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that I do need to mention is that the value of streaming, the value per stream that an artist earns is relative to the market. So it's just very important that we calibrate that in various parts of the world. Artists are able to earn vastly different amounts of money from the platform. To understand that, for example, India has a massive population. The growth of a streaming platform in that market does need to be low barrier to entry, though. So quite cheap, basically, is what I mean. And services like Apple and Spotify are about $1 a month, between $1 to $2 a month, to be able to access their premium tiers. Whereas if you roll up to a country like the UK, access to Spotify and Apple is about £12 a month. So, just logically, you are a British artist and 70% of your streams are coming out of the UK. You are earning per stream out of a pool that's of revenue is 15 times more than that of an artist in their Indian market. Now, in India, there would be an argument of volume, right? So many more people in India, so an artist can achieve far more streams relative to the UK. And you see the bigger artists coming out with an approximation. A really big artist in India can still a lot of money, even though the value of streams is quite low, because there's so many people there. And a really big British artist can earn a lot of money out of the UK because the value is so high. When you start walking down the ladder, so looking at mid-range artists, development artists, niche artists, all of that, this does become really complicated. And in the physical world, we used to have something called the long tail, which was all artists outside of the top 100 and how they were doing. Because ultimately, I know people outside of the music industry feel that they've heard of artists as overnight success, like the one that's kind of someone like Lady Gaga. She's a great example. Where did she come from? Lady Gaga. She had a massive hit. She became a global star, and it was like she had overnight success. But the truth of that is that she's a very hardworking artist that spent years and years and years honing herself, building her network, and finally got to a stage where Lady Gaga became a global star. And I think anyone who's worked in the music business understands there are tens of thousands of artists and label people outside of the top 200 working continuously to try to grow and get there. And that's where the quality of all of the world's top music artists comes from. This vast industry where people only seem to really know the sort of cream of the crop. Anyway, getting back to the question of how mid-range and development artists earn. This is the pivotal question. Are we in a world where a youngster who is musically gifted but perhaps born into poverty, say, has a line to be able to be seen and heard, create their music, and escalate themselves to the higher levels of the music industry? And I think, that's where the conscience of this game comes in. In some markets, the answer to that question is yes. And in other markets, I would put India, I would put Africa forward, I would put parts of Latin America forward. It is incredibly difficult for a young, talented artist who is successful, but not big, to be able to generate enough revenue to be able to reinvest. And that is an issue. And I think there are models that people are talking about that, that involve Web3, that involve D2C merchandising, that involve other revenue streams that can be plugged in so that the long tail is able to both sustain itself and grow in order to be able to develop the superstars of the future. So where do I think it's headed? It's a difficult question to answer, because what is very positive about the modern era is that a talented youngster has far less barriers through which they need to transcend. Gatekeepers, for example. 20 years ago, we as record labels did not have a chance in hell of getting a record off the ground from a mainstream point of view if we didn't get support from radio, which means that we had to compel radio stations inside of the markets that we were working to support the music that we had invested into artists that had spent time in studio. And if we didn't get that support, the commercial prospects for that project completely fell over. We don't live in that era anymore. There certainly are still gatekeepers, but social media has introduced a tier where a bright, talented youngster can actually do it on their own, right? And I think when we look at the fairness of the situation, we have to make this kind of evaluation of a young artist who's good at music, in order to be successful, needs to also be able to develop into a social media influencer. So where it's headed is toward a place where musicians, introverts, so talented musicians who are struggle relative to extroverted, social media savvy, talented music artists. And yeah, I don't know how to feel about that, because I feel like there's a lot of talent that would be lost through this model, but it is kind of where we find ourselves. Before I hand over to you, I would just say, I think being successful in music is as difficult as it's ever been. So rolling back 30, 40 years, when the only way you could make music that was good enough to be sold to people was to get into a high studio and be signed by it, all the way over to where we are right now, where if you are bright and talented, you can do it on your own. It's still just as hard. It's still, we'll see only the most talented and most fortunate ones rise to the top. So where is it headed? I think to where it's always been headed. It is very difficult to be successful. If you are going to focus your life to it, you should be ready for that. You've achieved a modicum of success, but which was not the ultimate dream that you'd hoped for. You should still be very proud of yourself, because you've done something significant. If you're a musician who is able to earn your living out of playing music, you have my respect. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. You've mentioned so many interesting points there. And I just want to touch on the fact that, the gatekeeper is the problem as we move forward into Web3. This is the thing everybody's talking about. You need to have peer-to-peer so that the fans and the music. So just like you said, in the past, you had a megalith between the artist and the fan, and it was a huge production to actually get there, because you could only get them in the record store. Whereas now, anybody with a phone and the internet can release a song on Spotify. So there's nobody really curating, unless it's at the top level, this music that's going out there. And I think how many songs a day go onto Spotify? Like 40,000, or I don't know.
Thousands.
But
yeah.
Thousands and thousands. So I think that also, and what you get is the average artist is not keen on being a social media influencer. They want to make music, and they don't want to do this thing. So my sort of thinking, and that's why I created BlockTune, because it's not a record label, it's a curatorship. and it is working with artists to give that independence to them, because I still think you need something which we don't have now. Now it's just a free for all. You need something that's going to take good music, free the musician and give them good compensation, and enter them into this new world where they may do it. So, that's really what I'm trying to do with BlockTune. I'm trying to build something that doesn't exist, where we do bring that respect to artists where they're actually earning. Because like you just said just now, if you're an artist and you're living off music, you've done something really significant, because 90% of them, maybe even more, are not doing that, and it's so interesting to me because music is such a part of our existence. It's everywhere. It reminds us of our past. It excites us about our present. It invites us to look into the future. And yet it is so devalued, and that is kind of my thinking behind BlockTune and Gated. So you'll see the slide up now. We are kind of, in my hope, moving further and further into Web3. And as I said, offering artists new ways to engage with their audience and monetize their music through NFTs. I think one of the biggest problems with the current state is the language that's being used. It's very confusing for people, and it needs to be a kind of simple lead on, just another music app or another music platform paid for in another music currency. And that's where we're going with BlockTune and with Gated. So I want to hear from you. What do you think? I mean, I haven't, I'm not sure if I've shared the actual functionality of Gated with you, but it's very similar to what you can do with Spotify. It's the albums come out. We've got, buy track instead of mint, trying to bring it to people and to what they understand. Now, I'm interested in your thoughts on that, and whether you think there is a future for artists, and maybe compare it to what you're doing at ONErpm, because I know it is very different. But I just want to talk about, opportunities for artists going forward. Because each thing works in cycles. Spotify is not going to exist forever. Yes, we'll have streaming, but I think it's going to evolve into something else. And I think ONErpm is doing that, and I think blockchain will do that. I mean, we just had a song before we go back to you, because I'm asking you a lot of questions. But there's an artist called Violetta, and she is a very prominent artist in the Bitcoin world. And she just sold, remember, there was an album, I think somebody said it yesterday, Wu-Tang Clan or something made one album. Was it them?
Yeah.
And so she's released, there's just one song on Bitcoin, and it was sold yesterday for 1 Bitcoin for a track. Yeah. So there is interest. It's just figuring it out, because obviously it's so new. And I think, people like you can add such value, because there's so many pitfalls. There's so many things to think about going into it. But, let's just have a look. I'm interested in your thoughts. What do you feel those opportunities are for artists?
Yeah, so what you're doing with BlockTune is admirable and important, and R&D is absolutely crucial, right? There's kind of sort of blockchain tech, Web3, contains within it opportunities that will unlock every exercise, every effort to distribute a record in a different way tests potential model that could come in and take over the business. And you doing this in your way will lead you towards learnings and understanding whether this could work or not, and help to grow your understanding and passion for moving this forward. And if there are people like you and your fellows invested into Web3 and blockchain tech, look for that opportunity. I think it's wonderful and important work is for you, because I know how much effort it takes. The company that I work for is about 14 years old now. It was founded in 2010. ONErpm has a founder and an owner to this day. It is not a funded business, meaning it runs off its own margin. Now, all of the competitors are funded businesses. The Orchard is owned by Sony. A is owned by Warner. Ingrooves is owned by Universal. Believe is a publicly funded company. These are all companies that are funded, that have shareholders, etc., and are businesses that are valued based on their market. ONErpm, it's fundamentally not focused on market share. It's focused on good deals, good artists, and success, because it isn't funded. Like literally, if you want to use the word independent, ONErpm is a truly independent business because it has an owner that is running it out of a peak across the whole music industry. It is the fifth biggest record company in the world. It found its in America in 2010, proliferated into the US, spread out across Turkey, UK, Europe, Australia, APAC, and is now, as I said, the fifth biggest distribution music business in the world. Why has it been so successful? Well, it's founded in the principles of the music industry. There is more share available from gross revenue to help to give to artists, and decent splits, good commercials, fair license deals is the order of the day. The ethos of the company is, do you have a good deal? Are your commercials fair relative to what you need? So, do you have a good deal, and do you have what you need to be able to grow? If you do, work with that company, right? ONErpm endeavors to be that company. So if I could explain a little bit, the difference between a label and a distribution company. A label takes a higher share but offers more services and focus. A label will sign you to an 80-20 deal. They earn 80%, but they have a team, promo team, a commercial team, and a whole infrastructure to be able to back your career. A distribution company will sit at an 80-20 or a 90-10 to the artist, but give you a platform, and that's all. You are on your own. You have a platform, you can distribute music, but the team isn't there. ONErpm endeavors to sit between those two worlds, offer good commercials and a fair deal, but also provide the team and the services that an artist needs in order to grow. That is why it is the biggest music company in the world, and why it has grown to the extent that it has over the last 14 years. Now, technology succeeds where it addresses a gap. And this is where I'm coming back to you, good kitty, is your work will succeed when you work out how you're going to address an issue that solves a major problem in a way that works from a commercial point of view. My concerns around Web3 and blockchain tech is perhaps it may be over addressing the artist concerns and under addressing the consumer. I say that in an under-researched way off the top of my head, but I believe the reason why we haven't seen a gargantuan platform or business model come forward as yet is that the balance between artist and consumer hasn't been found as yet. And I want to come back to my first point and say that the work that you're doing is endeavoring to find that balance. And when you do, and I do hope it's you will be very successful.
I hope so, Paul. As you know, it's been I think the last 15 years, I've been trying to find a solution. And I'm hoping this is because, like I said earlier, when you look at music and how it has been manufactured, distributed, created, consumed, it has moved practically at the forefront of technology. And I often say, when I talk about this, that we have complex issues inside blockchain. I mean, it starts off with the fact that you need a new wallet and you need to learn how to use that new wallet and be responsible for your funds. There's so much building going on in DeFi, in decentralized finance, and that is even more complex for the consumer because there you've got to really manage your money. You can't just go to an investment house and say, here, I want to invest this. You've got to keep up to date with all the trends. So it's complex. My thinking with musicians is that the consumer is used to consuming it in a digital way. They have moved with each tech as it's gone through. So I think the trick is to find like you say, the balance between the artist and the consumer. And I think with the adoption of Bitcoin, which we know is going to happen as adoption grows further and further, and as wallets get easier to use, where you're not having to, remember a 12-seed phrase and you're going to lose all your money and stuff. So what we're building with Gated is a platform where I'm hoping that when the consumer sees it, they recognize it. It's not foreign. It makes them feel safe. And they can, just like you can do on a lot of the other platforms, they can listen to a little bit of it. And if they want to, they can buy it. And I think you spoke earlier about those close-knit fans. I feel like those are the people that are going to enter this first because they're going to go, this is the artist I love. They're doing this. I'm going to do it. And I think that's when the wave will come. Because even though, and I mean, you remember when CDs came out, people were horrified at CDs. They did remember those ads where they used to say they scratch and they break in half. And I always say, have you used a tape? I mean, how many pencils did we take to try and wind our tape back on, And then when the MP3s came out, people were like, I want the artwork. I don't like this. And all at once. So we've got a lot of barriers that we still have to resolve in the tech, in how it's presented to the consumer before, like you say, before we can do with BlockTune and with Gated. And we also have another platform called AudioBox, which is also coming out on Stack. So there is growth in this, I think. People are seeing it. And once there's more and more competition, that's going to get better. And that one lucky strike is going to happen. But for me, and that's why I'm putting BlockTune in between Gated and the artist, so that they can be guided, because it's a necessity. It's a necessity to make sure the music is good, that there's not so much music that it's confusing, and that it is easily accessible to the consumer, and the consumer understands it. So yeah, it is a big job. I spend day in and day out thinking about it and working on it. So, and we have our first album coming out. We had 8 artists all record original tracks. Then we introduced them to 8 visual artists who then created artwork inspired by the music. And so we're selling digital art, visual art that is beautiful to look at, with music that goes with the digital art that inspired the art. So I think that's an interesting way to do it. Um, and like I said again, we're making it easy for people to buy it, as long as they do have Bitcoin or stacks in their wallet. So yeah, so I'm excited about it, as you know. And yeah, like I said, 19th of November, Gated is launching. It's launching with the album When Walls Break. We have a request out at the moment on the website where we're asking musicians to submit their music as well. And we're getting submissions in for that. So, and I think, you know, a lot of the artists I've spoken to, their attitude is, well, we don't earn any money in the current landscape. So what have we got to lose? And I think once we get the content, we need to make sure we get the content on the right app. And then it sort of starts hopefully snowballing. So
Yeah.
interesting times ahead. So yeah, I think we have to start wrapping up. I don't know if you've got anything more that you would like to add that maybe we haven't covered.
Yeah. So the biggest revelation for me over the last 10 years has been artists' access to data. Over the 20 years or so that I've worked in the music industry, the workings of how they earn their revenue and get paid have been cloaked. An artist, as a creative, is not adept in this area, and that quality has been taken advantage of completely. An artist finishes a piece of music, hands it over to the big machine, and then gets royalties paid back to them and tries to make sense of that. The era that we are in right now does away with all of that. And again, the company that I work for has great tech, an amazing platform, and distinguishes itself amongst its competitors as a company that cares about updating its platform and investing into it. There are too many digital distribution companies at the moment that do not invest into their product and whose tech becomes outdated and slow and cumbersome. The best companies today are the ones that are giving an artist the reality of their business and access to day-to-day information that shows them how their audience is reacting to their output and where they are earning their money from. Some of the most inspiring stories that I've seen basically over the last 2 years or so has been DIY artists, completely independent artists that have done away with any of the misgivings of I don't look at data or that's not for me, right? I'm only in the studio, that are actually looking at their career information as it's coming in and letting it inform them as to how frequently they should roll out music, where they should be thinking of when it comes to touring and artist collaboration, what they earn from the various platforms, and how the commercial infrastructure works relative to their social media dashboards and what it is that they're seeing there. It's those artists that can crack that nut, that understand their audiences and how to engage with them, that are the ones that are going into self-sustainable, high-earning, independent artists that do not need anyone. Every artist that we work with, we have an ambition to grow their active listener base. So escalate them beyond gatekeepers and algorithms to a point where they're in touch with their audience. And if they're rolling out a song on a Monday afternoon and they want people to listen to it, they can do that without having to conform to DSP editorial submission timelines and the various other gatekeeper orientated issues that artists today still have to conform to. So I would say that is a very positive thing, and I would encourage artists listening to engage with this information. If you are an independent artist and your distribution company does not provide you with up to the minute, crystal clear visibility on your career and how it's doing, you should find another company, because it can inform you and it can show you how your business works, and where you have your opportunities. And I'm seeing it on almost a daily basis. So I think ultimately, where there are innovative, intelligent people working on the next big thing, there is equally a Web 2 opportunity today for artists to raise the blinkers on how they are earning money by looking at the data that they have, or having advisors and people close to them that do, if it's something that they're unable to do or not interested in. So I just wanted to add that point, because it is a big distinction and it puts a lot of power into an artist's hands. I mean, I come from an era where an artist would only see the reporting on their income quarterly. You would see a statement of what money you'd made and from where, quarterly, right? Whereas right now, you can tease something and make a decision on if it's going to be successful or not before you even put it out. So this has been a highly evolved era of the music industry. And if you're a modern creator engaging with your audiences, you have to make use of it.
Yeah, it is interesting. It is very interesting, Paul. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've got one last quick question for you, because we have run out of time. Do you see Web 2 and Web 3 coming together to redefine what's going on, or do you still see them as two separate entities that need to exist without each other?
My view is they're separate entities. I see Web3 as the cassette tape to the vinyl record, as the streaming model to the download model. It is the next thing, and when it clicks in, it will kill off the old model and take the music industry forward. It just needs to find that solution that works, and it will take over. There's some caveats in there. Things like faster royalty payments, things like redistribution of income around streaming, different revenue models, etc. that blockchain provide when it comes to license ownership and IP ownership and distribution of income, which is all far more complex topics, is where I think the key is. If there is a faster, fairer way to distribute income to artists on a basis that acknowledges their work in a way that they perhaps did back during the physical era, when a sort of jazz musician could sign a blue note and sell 30,000 records in America that would fund the album that they made and most of their tour. Like, if we can find answers to areas like that, where the long tail is able to sustain better and the quality of music increases, then I think we're moving in the right direction. I think Web3 has that and will be the next thing, and we'll kill off Web2.
Yeah, well, that's just what I wanted to hear. Well, here we have it. We've got a series. We're going to be interviewing all of the artists that you see on the screen. We are going to have them perform live music, and we're going to introduce the consumer and their fans to this very easy to use app that Gary is busy building. So here is the hope. These are the pioneers. These are the firsts. And they've come on board during a time when we are still building it. We are very interested in talking to people like you, Paul, who give us insights as to how we can build it better. And even though I think, yes, Web 2 and Web 3 are very separate, I think there are learnings from Web 2, and I think there are people in Web 2, like yourself, who can offer great advice and great help in rebuilding what needs to be rebuilt. You know, where an artist sells a song and whatever he sold before goes directly into his wallet at that time. So yeah, it's been really wonderful talking to you. I'm very grateful that you came on the show, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's it for us for today at BlockTune episode 1. We have completed it with one of my dearest friends. So what a celebration for me to have you on as my first guest. And thank you for sharing all of your insights. Very, very grateful, and I think very important for musicians who are listening in. And I think for fans as well, just to understand the industry. I think we need to do a lot more of that so that fans do understand how platforms like Spotify work, and how businesses like you work and how they can support those artists. So here's to that.
Nice one. Thank you.
All right, Paul. Have an awesome day, and thank you so much to Bitcoin Live DB for producing the show. Thank you to Nick. Thank you to Steve for coming on at the last minute and helping us get it right. And